The yeast we looked at under the microscope is probably the smallest living thing you've ever seen. Think about the tallest tree you've ever seen. This is probably the largest living thing you've seen. Between that single-celled yeast and huge trees, there's a wide variety of other living things, like some of the things you see in the picture. Biodiversity is diversity among living things. By the end of this video, you should be able to differentiate among the three types of biodiversity, explain the value of biodiversity, and describe the major threats to biodiversity. Biodiversity is all of the genetically based variation in all living things. Genetically based means that its variety is coded for in its DNA. The variety might be in the way something looks, but not all appearances are genetic. Have you ever used green hair dye on green and gold days? You changed your appearance, but you didn't change your DNA. And not all genetic variety can be seen in your outward appearance. The fact that you get sick from a virus going around and your friend doesn't has to do with genetic variety of the human immune system. When you're exposed to certain bugs and when you get vaccines, you're training your immune system to respond to future invaders. So not all immunity has to do with genetics either. There are three types of biodiversity: ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. Ecosystem diversity has to do with a variety of different habitats. Species diversity refers to the number of different species in the biosphere. Remember, a species can be defined by organisms that are able to mate and produce fertile offspring. Genetic variety refers to variety within a particular species. Species with a lot of genetic variety have many different forms of genes that they have. Despite how different you might think humans look, humans don't have a lot of genetic diversity. We're only 0.1% different from any other human. Species like cheetah that have been bred in captivity, because of such small population numbers, have very low species diversity, which makes them susceptible to disease. There are three main reasons why biodiversity is important to humans. First of all, most modern medicines were discovered in plants. Aspirin originally came from willow trees, but we can now create the chemical aspirin in labs. Many other medicines come from plants, and no doubt there are many medicines from plants we haven't even discovered yet. Biodiversity is also important in agriculture. The majority of crop plants that we eat are genetically identical to each other. However, crop plants have wild relatives. Wild tomatoes are only about the size of a pea, but we've bred them to have very large fruits. It's important to maintain genetic diversity so that genes from wild varieties can be engineered into crop plants to give crops desirable characteristics and resistance to diseases. The graph on the right shows how much genetic variety existed between different crop plants in 1903. The wider the colored bar, the more genetic diversity among crop plants. The bottom portion of the graph reflects current genetic diversity. The potato famine in Ireland was caused by a virus, and because there was very little genetic diversity in the potato population, the famine was so much more severe. Finally, different species help ecosystems in different ways. Plants with large, solid roots hold soil in place and prevent erosion. And some plants take up poisonous metals in the soil, which prevents groundwater from being contaminated. Despite all the ways that biodiversity is helpful, human activity is reducing the amount of biodiversity. There are 5 main ways they're doing this. When land is cleared to build roads, homes, and buildings, the number of different organisms in a habitat is reduced. The smaller a habitat is, the fewer species that can live there. When areas are developed, splitting one large habitat into several small ones, biological islands are created. This is called habitat fragmentation. Destroying and altering species habitats is the #1 cause of extinction. Hunting and demand for animal products is another significant cause of species extinction. Laws protect endangered and threatened species, but people still illegally hunt animals, like elephants and alligators, for leather and ivory. The second large cause of extinction is the introduction of invasive species. Species are transported around the world due to large amounts of global travel and the exchange of goods. When a new organism comes in and has no natural predators, it's able to eat its prey unchecked, which causes a major reduction in resources for organisms throughout the ecosystem. Lack of resources can cause organisms to die and eventually become extinct. Pollution and climate change also result in the loss of biodiversity. Changing environmental conditions faster than species can adapt can cause the extinction of organisms. When carbon dioxide dissolves in water, the water becomes more acidic. This is threatening coral reefs, which contain huge amounts of biodiversity because of the different types of coral and fish that live in and on the reef. Many organisms that live in or on a coral reef have a very small range of tolerance, and small changes can have a big effect, wiping out species. There are two main strategies that are important in conserving biodiversity so future generations can benefit from the organisms that live on the Earth right now. First of all, individual species can be protected. Endangered species have plans put together by an organization called the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. It usually involves breeding the animal in captivity to restore their numbers. Breeding might take place at zoos or conservation organizations. At the Tyson Research Center near Castlewood Park, there's a breeding program that is attempting to increase the number of wolves. Because the biggest reason for extinction is the destruction of habitats, it's also important to preserve the natural habitats of endangered animals. State and national parks set aside land that cannot be developed in order to preserve biodiversity in those habitats. Ecological hotspots are places where significant numbers of species and habitats are near extinction. In the map below, they're highlighted in red.